The Medici of Florence. Picture Florence in the early 1400s, stone streets humming with trade, painters hunting for patrons, and one family quietly buying the city's future. The Medici began not as nobles, but as bankers. Giovanni de' Medici built a network of branches across Europe. By the time his son Cosimo de' Medici took over, the family bank handled the money of popes and princes. With that gold came influence. Cosimo didn't rule through titles, he ruled through debts. He funded Brunelleschi's dome on the cathedral, turning Florentine pride into stone. His grandson, Lorenzo il Magnifico, pushed the power further, protecting geniuses like Leonardo da Vinci, Botticelli, and Michelangelo. Every masterpiece we now call Renaissance owed something to Medici money. When enemies tried to kill Lorenzo in church, the famous Pazzi conspiracy, Florence itself rose to defend him. By the 1500s, their reach leapt beyond Tuscany. One Medici became Pope Leo X, another Pope Clement VII, and two Medici princesses, Catherine de' Medici and Marie de' Medici, took crowns of France. For 200 years, the family blended art, religion, and economics into pure political chemistry. Even when the bank collapsed under later generations, their legacy had already rewritten Europe's idea of power. Wealth could shape culture deeper than armies could. Walk through Florence today, the Uffizi, the Cathedral Dome, the quiet Medici chapels, and you're still inside their portfolio. The Medicis didn't just sponsor the Renaissance, they built the operating system of modern Western civilization, where influence, innovation, and image rule long after the coin is spent. The Romanovs of Russia, 1613 to 1917. Now, picture Moscow rising from years of chaos, the time of troubles. Out of that darkness came one teenager, Michael Romanov, crowned Tsar in 1613 and founding a dynasty that would rule Russia for more than 3 centuries. The Romanovs started as restorers, uniting far-flung lands, taming revolts, but soon grew into empire builders. Peter the Great dragged Russia into modernity, shaved beards, built an army from scratch, and planted a new glittering capital, St. Petersburg, Russia's window to Europe. 2 generations later, Catherine the Great pushed the empire to its largest borders, from the Black Sea to the Pacific, courting philosophers while conquering neighbors. By the 19th century, they ruled 1/6 of Earth's land, yet the world changed faster than their palaces. Industrial Europe sped ahead, serfs remained chained until 1861. When Nicholas II led Russia into World War I, hunger, losses, and Rasputin's scandals shattered royal faith. In 1917, revolution exploded, and within a year, the Tsar, the Tsarina, and their 5 children were executed. 300 years of autocracy ended in abasement. But the Romanovs' shadow shaped what came next. The Soviet Union rose from their ashes, proving their empire hadn't vanished, only changed flags. The Hapsburgs of Austria-Spain, 1200s to 1918. Imagine a family whose motto might as well have been, "Let others wage wars, you, lucky Austria, marry." The Habsburgs perfected statecraft by wedding their way to power. From a modest Swiss castle in the 1200s, they collected crowns like trading cards. Austria, Bohemia, Hungary, Spain, the Netherlands, even parts of the Americas. At their height in the 1500s, under Charles V, they ruled lands where, quite literally, the sun never set. Their empire fused faith and dynasty, Catholic kings defending tradition against reform and revolution. But that web of marriages soon tangled into weakness, endless cousins, the famous Habsburg jaw, and political inertia. By the 1800s, they became cautious caretakers, not conquerors. Franz Joseph I presided over a patchwork of a dozen nations struggling for identity. Then, 1914, a Habsburg heir, Franz Ferdinand, was shot in Sarajevo. The fuse he lit blew up the empire itself.
In 1918, the centuries-old dynasty dissolved alongside Austria-Hungary. Still, from Gothic cathedrals to Spanish palaces, their legacy endures. They invented multinational governance long before the EU dreamed of it, showing how one last name can dominate and ultimately drown in its own success.
The Rothschilds of Europe, 18th century onward. Shift now to Frankfurt around 1790. In a cramped house on Judengasse Street, Mayor Amschel Rothschild trained his 5 sons not just to count coins, but to read empires. Each son founded a branch of the family bank in London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, and Frankfurt, linked by trust faster than any courier. They financed kings during the Napoleonic Wars, built railways, traded government bonds, and quietly pioneered the modern banking network. At their 1870s peak, the Rothschilds controlled more wealth than some countries, funding the Suez Canal, mining industries, and global infrastructure. Their real genius wasn't greed, it was information speed. Couriers and coded letters delivered battlefield news hours before anyone else, letting them out-invest rivals. While their fortune sparked myths of secret domination, their real influence was subtler, standardizing credit systems, stabilizing currencies, and proving that capital, not crowns, would rule the modern age. Even today, the family name equals financial legend. The Medici Bank built the Renaissance. The Rothschild Bank built global capitalism. In both stories, the currency was trust, and the interest still compounds 2 centuries later. The Ming imperial family of China, 1368 to 1444. Picture a rebel monk's son, Zhu Yuanzhang, standing before the ruins of the Mongol-ruled Yuan dynasty. In 1368, he claimed the mandate of heaven as Emperor Hongwu, founding the Ming, a dynasty that would define Chinese greatness for nearly 3 centuries. The Ming rebuilt walls, canals, and cities, reorganized the civil service so tightly that its exam system became the dream or nightmare of generations. Under his descendant, Yongle, Beijing rose into a new capital, crowned by the Forbidden City, while Admiral Zhang Hei's treasure fleets, giant ships years ahead of Europe's, roamed the Indian Ocean, projecting China's reach to Africa. But prosperity bred bureaucracy. By the 1600s, silver inflation, corruption, and famine hollowed the empire. Manchurian army seized the moment. In 1644, Beijing's gatekeeper opened the city to invaders, and the dynasty fell. Still, Ming porcelain, literature, and grand urban planning shaped Asia's identity for centuries. The Ming line showed how cultural power can outlive the empire that created it. The Tudors of England, 1485 to 1603. Now, step into England after decades of civil war. In 1485, Henry Tudor defeated Richard III at Bosworth and united rival houses with one crown. The Tudor era was only 5 monarchs long, yet it forged modern Britain. Henry VII stabilized the treasury. His son, Henry VIII, split from Rome, creating the Church of England for love and control alike. Henry's 6 marriages and dramatic break with the Pope redefined power itself, nation over faith. After turmoil came intellect. Elizabeth I, ruling from 1558, faced invasion threats and religious chaos, but turned England into a naval power, defeating the Spanish Armada in 1588. Her court became Europe's stage for Shakespeare, exploration, and global ambition. The Tudor brand mixed ruthless politics with charisma, transforming monarchy into personality. When Elizabeth died childless, she left no heirs but a stronger national identity than Britain had ever known. Their 118-year drama remains a perfect model of power condensed, then immortalized. The Borgias of Renaissance Italy, 15th century. Few names whisper corruption like Borgia.
Rising from Spain to Rome, Rodrigo Borgia became Pope Alexander VI in 1492, turning the Vatican into a family enterprise. His children, Cesare and Lucrezia, symbolized both charm and menace. Cesare, a warrior prince who inspired Machiavelli's The Prince, and Lucrezia, painted as both victim and villain in rumor. Through marriage alliances, assassinations, and riches from papal coffers, the Borgias tried to carve an Italian state. For a decade, they nearly succeeded. Cesare controlled most of central Italy, and Alexander VI commanded Christendom's throne. But plague, betrayal, and Alexander's death in 1503 collapsed their empire overnight. Yet they left a blueprint: how charisma, image, and political theater could outmaneuver noble birth. In the end, their downfall became legend, their name shorthand for ambition without breaks. The Borgias proved that in the Renaissance, the path from altar to empire was paved not just with faith, but with fear, family, and audacity. The Yamato imperial line of Japan. Imagine a dynasty so old its founder is remembered as the great-grandson of the sun goddess. That's the Yamato line, the backbone of Japan for nearly 2,000 years. By the 6th century, Yamato rulers unified scattered clans through skillful alliances and the adoption of Chinese writing, Buddhism, and statecraft. Over time, they learned survival through flexibility. When samurai shoguns seized real power in the Middle Ages, the emperor simply remained the sacred center, quiet yet untouchable. The system endured until the 1800s, when Emperor Meiji reclaimed authority and modernized the nation at dizzying speed. Railways, factories, constitution, global power, all under one imperial symbol. After the 1945 defeat in World War II, Emperor Hirohito renounced his divinity but stayed on the throne, turning monarchy into cultural continuity instead of political command. Today, his descendants still reign, a living link between myth and modernity. The Yamato family's true power has never been conquest, but durability, a masterclass in how adaptation can make a crown outlast empires.
The Plantagenets of England and France, 1154 to 1485. Go back to the age of chainmail and crusades. In 1154, Henry II of Anjou took England's throne, ruling lands from Scotland to the Pyrenees. The Plantagenets built a realm that sat half in France, half on the island, and all on ambition. Henry's dynasty birthed legends: Eleanor of Aquitaine, King John and his forced Magna Carta, 1215, the warrior Edward I, and the crusading Richard Lionheart. They built castles, laws, and myth alike, but also civil wars and betrayals. By the 14th century, their branches tore at each other in the 100 Years' War, and then the Wars of the Roses, a family feud that devoured generations. In 1485, Bosworth Field ended it. The last Plantagenet king, Richard III, fell, and the Tudors rose. The dynasty left behind common law, Parliament's roots, and England's enduring fascination with royal drama. 5 centuries of rule distilled one lesson: family strength can expand an empire, but family pride can also bury it. The Ptolemies of Egypt. When Alexander the Great died, his generals cut his empire into pieces. One of them, Ptolemy I Soter, claimed Egypt and founded the dynasty that made Alexandria the brain of the ancient world. The Ptolemies, Macedonian by blood but Egyptian by throne, fused Greek science with Nile tradition. They built the Library of Alexandria, the lighthouse, and a trade network stretching from India to the Mediterranean. Their court mixed philosophers, astronomers, and intrigue in equal measure. But centuries of sibling marriages and palace plots turned brilliance to chaos. By the time Cleopatra VII ruled, Rome was rising and Egypt was the prize.
Her alliances and tragedies with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony ended in 30 BCE, when Octavian conquered Egypt and Cleopatra took her own life. The Ptolemies had ruled almost 300 years. Their fall ended the pharaoh tradition itself. Yet their blend of cultures seeded the Hellenistic world's art, science, and the legend of a queen whose intelligence could still outshine an empire's fall. The House of Saud of Arabia. Picture the Arabian Peninsula 100 years ago. Vast desert, scattered tribes, and holy cities that drew the world's eyes, but not yet its oil. In 1902, a young warrior, Abdulaziz ibn Saud, recaptured Riyadh with barely a few dozen men. By 1932, he had united the peninsula into Saudi Arabia, grounding his rule in a pact with Wahhabi Islam. 7 years later came the alchemy of power: oil. American engineers struck crude in 1938, and the royal family's fortunes surged from camel caravans to jets in a generation. With billions in revenue, the Sauds modernized cities, funded mosques, and exported both petroleum and ideology. Abdulaziz's sons ruled one after another, using family consensus to keep balance. By the 1970s, Saudi oil money could shake world markets. By the 2000s, it made the kingdom a global player, from OPEC to Washington. Today, under Mohammed bin Salman, the House seeks to diversify through Vision 2030, high-tech cities replacing sand. In just a century, the Sauds turned tribal loyalty into geopolitical leverage, proving that in the modern era, energy can be lineage.
The Mogul dynasty of India. Imagine the thunder of cannon echoing across North India in 1526 as Babur, a Central Asian descendant of Timur and Genghis Khan, defeats the Delhi Sultanate at Panipat. That victory births the Mughal Empire, one of history's richest dynasties. His grandson, Akbar the Great, expands it to most of the subcontinent, blending Persian elegance with Indian tolerance, abolishing religious taxes, and inviting scholars of every faith. Under Jahangir, Shah Jahan, and Aurangzeb, the empire's court dazzled Europe: Persian-style gardens, jeweled thrones, and engineering wonders like the Taj Mahal. At its 1600s height, the Mughals produced perhaps a quarter of world GDP, their textiles sought from London to Java. But by the 18th century, succession wars, corruption, and colonial pressure eroded control. After the Great 1857 Rebellion, the British deposed the last emperor, Bahadur Shah II, marking empire to colony. Yet Mughal architecture, art, and cuisine still define South Asia's identity. They didn't just rule India, they designed its aesthetic soul. The Bonapartes of France. Now shift to post-revolutionary France, chaos on every street. Into it strides a 30-year-old general, Napoleon Bonaparte, who in 1799 seizes power and crowns himself emperor in 1804. From minor Corsican roots, he lifts his family into royalty. Brothers on European thrones, sisters marrying dukes, a dynasty engineered at cannon point. In barely a decade, he redrew Europe's borders, ruled 70 million people, and spread laws, the Napoleonic Code, that outlived his empire. After Waterloo and exile, the name seemed finished, but in 1852, his nephew Louis Napoleon revived it as Emperor Napoleon III, building Paris's boulevards and modern industry before falling in the Franco-Prussian War. The Bonapartes rose twice from revolution to empire and fell twice to overreach. Their legacy? Merit over birth, ambition as destiny, and the idea that one audacious mind could still bend history's map, if only for a heartbeat. The Kennedys of the United States, 20th century. Move to 20th century America.
Where political royalty wasn't born, it was built. Joseph P. Kennedy, a millionaire investor and ambassador, turned family discipline into dynasty, steering his 9 children toward power. The crown passed to John F. Kennedy, elected president in 1960 at just 43 years old. For a brief, dazzling 1,000 days, JFK embodied modern leadership. Civil rights speeches, the moon race, the Cuban Missile Crisis held in 13 nerve-cutting days. After his 1963 assassination, hope turned to myth. Yet the family torch burned on. Robert F. Kennedy's passionate 1968 campaign, Ted Kennedy's decades in Senate leadership, and the next generation's continued public service. The Kennedys blended Irish-American grit with cinematic charm. For decades, polls ranked them America's most admired family. But tragedy chased them. Plane crashes, scandals, assassinations, so often that Kennedy curse became shorthand for fortune and fate intertwining. Their enduring impact isn't just politics, it's the idea that charisma and service can make democracy feel noble, even when perfection proves impossible.
The Capetians of France, 987 AD to 1328 and beyond. Now travel back to medieval France, 987 AD, when the nobles elected a steady, pragmatic warrior, Hugh Capet, as king. No one guessed his bloodline would rule Western Europe for more than 800 years through countless branches, Valois, Bourbon, and beyond. The early Capetians slowly tightened control over fractious nobles, making Paris the kingdom's heart. Under rulers like Philip II Augustus and Louis IX, St. Louis, France expanded its lands, refined its administration, and emerged as Europe's cultural compass. Their genius was continuity. Each king trained his heir long before succession, preventing chaos that wrecked rivals. Even when the direct line ended in 1328, its offshoots kept thrones from France to Spain to Naples. The last Bourbon monarch fell in the French Revolution, but Capetian blood still reigns today in places like Luxembourg and Spain. Their quiet innovation, stable heredity, and legal monarchy turned medieval feudalism into the first centralized European state. In essence, the Capetians wrote the long-term manual for how dynasties survive: consistency, patience, and a crown that outlived the century that forged it.